So this one says, we already knew from thorough investigation that immediately prior to the accident, either the driver of the first vehicle changed lanes without signaling, or the driver of the second vehicle was driving with excessive speed. So is this, I don't want to give it, I mean, we'll get to it. This is a premise, right? And if it's a premise, what do we know? Giovanna, what do we do? What are premises? You are at it, you know this.
Oh gosh, I know those. What's my line?
You always say it. You're like, but it's a blank, so we have to what?
Oh,
What do we do with premises?
You said.
What do we have to accept of premises?
Oh, but is we have to assume it's true.
Yeah, we have to assume it's true. So we're saying from this investigation, we know that the first vehicle changed without signaling or it was excessive driving, right? Like we know those two things are true.
Yes.
Either of these actions would make the driver liable for the resulting accident. So if either of those things happened, then the driver is liable, right?
Mm-hmm.
But further evidence has proved that the first vehicle's turn signal was not on. As soon as I read that, I stopped and I was like, oh, so the second person must have been driving with excessive speed. Did anybody else do that while they were reading? Okay, cool. But I went on and I was like, all right, I'm continuing on. Though the driver of that vehicle admits to have changing lanes. Okay, so the driver of the second vehicle is not liable for the accident. Automatically, I was like, what would guarantee that the second vehicle is not liable? What do you think, Taylor?
Whether the second vehicle is speeding or not.
Yes. Excellent. So,
I didn't hear her. What did she say?
Whether the second vehicle is speeding
or not.
Oh, can you cut her off? I heard.
Sorry.
Whether the second vehicle
was speeding or not.
Oh, okay.
Yes. And so I might have misspoke earlier. Either of these things would make a driver liable. I don't think it's referring to one driver in particular. I think it's saying that like if the first vehicle changed without signaling, it could be we would be talking about the driver that did that, or the second vehicle excessive speeding, we would be talking about that vehicle. I think that's common sense, but I think I misspoke. So when I went, okay, so a lot of people said A and E on this. So let's go ahead and just go through B and through D first. So B says whether the driver of the first vehicle knew that the turn signal was not on. Okay, has it ever worked for anybody? Like if you got pulled over for this and you're like, well, I didn't know that my turn signal wasn't on. Would a cop let you go for that? Like, I'm gonna try it and I'll let you know how it goes. But unfortunately in the court of law, right, like negligence is not an excuse. So that doesn't matter whether the driver knew or not, right? C says whether any other vehicles were involved in an accident. Well, what if other vehicles are involved? Does that strengthen the idea that the second vehicle is not liable? Nope. What about if no other vehicles weren't? That definitely does nothing. So we can cross off C. D says whether the driver of the first vehicle was a reliable witness. Does it matter if they were a reliable witness or not? Nope. So now we're between A and E. So go ahead and either affirm, take like 20 seconds and either affirm your answer or change your answer. Of what would help strengthen or weaken this conclusion? All right, so our correct answer is going to be A. But let's dive into this one a little bit more. So E says whether the driver of the second vehicle would have seen the turn signal flashing had it been on. does that matter? Like, what if the driver what if the vehicle would have seen the turn signal flashing had it been on? I think for those that put this answer, we have to dive into more. What is the issue that we're dealing with here?
Well,
Sorry, let me say this, Giovanna, then ask your question. Our issue is we know that if you don't signal, it could be your fault, or if you're driving with excessive speed, it can be your fault. We already know that the person didn't signal, right? So what we're trying to determine is it all the first vehicle's fault, or is it like both people's, right? Does that make sense? And so whether or not the second person saw the turn signal or not, does that make the first person any less or more liable?
well, I mean, if he would have had his turn signal on, I would have thought he was speeding. Yes, I was speeding, but if you had your turn signal on, I would have known that you were changing lanes.
Right. But does it matter? But I think this is saying, like, what this is saying is, like, if it had been on, the driver would have saw it. Does that matter? Like, what happens if I had my turn signal on and you saw it? Does that make me less or more guilt? Like, it does, like, okay, if he would have had if I would have had my turn signal on, does that make you like just because someone else is breaking the rules, are you allowed to break the rules?
No, but if I had my turn signal on, I followed the law.
Right,
And
but this for the second driver, does it matter if the second driver would have saw it? Because even if the second driver didn't see it, does that make you not guilty for not having your turn signal on?
he didn't see it, well, then he would have been wrong.
Well, we already know that, right?
Oh,
We already know.
I think maybe you're focusing too much on the first driver, but the conclusion's really about the second driver, right? And we already
Yes.
know.
the vehicle is not liable for the accident.
We're not trying to prove that the first driver is liable and the second person is not. We already know the first person is guilty. We're trying to determine if the second person is also guilty. Thank you, Shelby. You really helped me.
Now you said also guilty.
Yes, we already know that the first person is guilty.
Okay, also guilty. Yes, he's guilty of speeding.
No, the first person's guilty of not putting their turn signal on.
Right, and the second guy is guilty of speeding.
Yes, well, we want to know if they are.
Oh, okay.
So that's why A is our answer, because if the second vehicle was speeding, then is the second vehicle, well, it's confusing because it has a not in here, but if the second person was speeding, then that would weaken our answer because the second vehicle would also be liable for the accident. Where if we said no, the person was not speeding, it would strengthen this conclusion because they're not liable. It's just the first vehicle's fault for not turning on the turn signal.
Right, and yeah, okay.
Does that make sense? Because we're our conclusion is only focusing on the second vehicle.
So the second vehicle is not liable for the accident.
If they were speeding, they would be liable as well. Both of them would be. If they're not speeding, then only the first vehicle would be at fault.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
I mean, I understand your rationale, but okay.
Because I think the point here is focus. We care more about the conclusion than anything else.
Okay. Cool.
And it doesn't guarantee it either. The point of evaluate questions are just like, would this information be helpful in trying to evaluate the conclusion?
Okay.
And technically, whether they are speeding or not would be helpful.
Yeah. Now you make sense. I mean, if I'm in the courtroom, but you were speeding, Mike. Okay, I got you.
We need to know that answer to know.
Yes. I agree with you totally.
Perfect. Okay.